Earlier on, I was able to talk to General David Petraeus, the most eminent senior former military figure in the United States, who has recently been in Ukraine to see for himself. I began by asking General Petraeus why he thought the Russians had not come to the peace table.
Well, where they are is where they were back in 2022 when they were calling for essentially the capitulation of Ukraine. They want to begin with the state of the negotiations back at that time, which you'll recall was when Kyiv was surrounded, Kharkiv and Sumy were under pressure, et cetera, et cetera. It's very clear, I think, that President Putin really does not want to negotiate seriously. And beyond that, the conditions that he has established as necessary for an agreement are really unacceptable to Ukraine. And I'm hoping, frankly, that as a result of this, European leaders and President Trump will now turn their focus on Putin and their frustrations on him rather than on President Zelenskyy, which is already happening. The meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy in Rome around the Pope's funeral was very helpful. The mineral deal was done after that between the U.S. and Ukraine. There is a package of sanctions in the U.S. Senate that has 70 of the 100 senators supporting it. So there's a lot of momentum right now, I think, and you see it, of course, in Europe as well, with the 4 European leaders just having gone to Kyiv and meeting with President Zelenskyy, and a call put into President Trump during that time that they were in Kyiv. Yeah. So there's a unified front, I think, now that was not present certainly a month or two ago.
Well, let us hope so, and I want to come to that in just a second. But given that President Trump originally thought that he could resolve this war with a single phone call or in a few days, do you think he fundamentally misread President Putin?
Well, I think he probably overestimated his ability, because of the personal relation that they have had in the past, to bring this ceasefire to fruition. Keep in mind, we can't even get a 30-day temporary ceasefire at this point in time. So, yeah, I think there was probably a bit more put into what the relationship might yield than is proving in reality.
You mentioned the minerals deal a moment ago. Do you think that means that America is in it for the long term in terms of protecting Ukraine? You've got capital, you've got workers, you've got industrial elements now there inside Ukraine.
Well, it still remains to be brought to fruition, if you will. But I think it's an encouraging step. There's a number of encouraging steps, as I mentioned. Again, the meeting in Rome, the frustrations with Putin, the mineral deal, the European leaders going there, Europe getting more serious about defense. In fact, another very positive feature right now is that the Ukrainian artillery stocks of rounds is very substantial. Last year, you may recall, they were having to ration the use of the 155 millimeter howitzer rounds in particular. They would fire 2 for every 10 of the Russians and so forth. This year, because the U.S. pipeline was turned back on after that delay of last year in the House of Representatives, and because the Europeans are coming online, there was a very important Czech initiative where the president of the Czech Republic, in fact, a former NATO military committee chairman, had an initiative to ramp up very dramatically the production of these rounds. And then you have Ukraine itself. Its war machine is producing in very high gear. They will manufacture 2.5 million drones this year. Many of these are these suicide drones, short-range, first-person view, that they go up, they're not coming back. They're going to strike a target within 15 or 30 minutes or what have you. Large number of surveillance drones, others, missiles and so forth that are going into Russia every night as well. But this has become a very different war from what it was in the beginning, really through the first year and a half, when both sides were still trying to maneuver with tanks and armored fighting vehicles, artillery, air defense, combined arms operations, in other words. And those large vehicles cannot survive on this battlefield anymore. These drones can take out everything. You may have seen recently, a couple of weeks ago, a maritime drone from Ukraine launched 2 air defense missiles and took down 2 frontline Russian fighters, Su-30s, over the Crimean Peninsula. So the technology leap ahead here is unlike anything I've ever seen. They even now have essentially a digital catalog available through the defense software platform called Delta, where you can actually order drones and components and other kit, if you will. Well over 1,000 articles on there, and they'll deliver it to you within 3 to 6 days. So it's the Amazon of Ukrainian military assets.
I had no idea about that.
It just went online a week ago. There's an organization called Brave One, which is funded by the Ukrainian government to facilitate the growth of all of these startups that are producing this massive number of drones.
Let me ask you, General, about the UK, because like everybody else, we have been reviewing our own defence. And a lot of this is talked about in terms of percentage of GDP spending against NATO norms and all the rest. But in terms of actual things to do, people have been talking about the need for missile defence, increasing the size of the British Army. What, in your view, as a sort of candid friend, should we be doing when Lord Robertson's Strategic Defence Review is finally published?
Well, first of all, I know Lord Robertson very well. We were both in government at various times along the way, and I have enormous respect for him. I'm sure that this will be a product with enormous integrity. What they should do is go to Ukraine and sit there for a few weeks and learn about how Ukraine doesn't just have an Army, Navy, Air Force. Now it also has an unmanned systems force. It's a whole separate service. Learn about how they are producing such a massive number of drones that are very, very capable on the battlefield and are actually relatively cheap compared with what is made in the US and in the UK, and how a very different system of fighting for this kind of major combat operation is really underway, where, again, you have the surveillance drones that are watching constantly from both sides, by the way, and the minute they see movement, they'll pop up all of these suicide drones, the one-way drones, and take out whatever it is. So it's the most lethal front lines, I think, in history. Anything that can be seen at all will be hit and will be knocked out, destroyed, killed, what have you. And the casualties on the Russian side in particular, because they're the ones on the offensive, even though they achieve only incremental gains each day, but their casualties have been staggering. The estimates, including from the UK intelligence that have been made public, are that they're approaching 1 million soldiers that have been killed and wounded, and over 500,000 of those, well over that, actually were not able to return to the front line. So they were killed or so seriously wounded they couldn't be patched up and sent back. This is a very different war. All wars are unique. The next one won't necessarily be like this, but if it's on the European continent, you can expect to see many, many similar features. And I think it really would be very wise to spend weeks there, not just the overnight train and a day and come back out, but to stay there for a number of weeks, go visit their drone training school, learn about the intelligence software platform that they have, which is, I believe, the most advanced in the world at very, very low price, low cost. All of these initiatives, I think, should inform the kind of review that Lord Robertson is leading.
So we're going to need, as it were, our own Royal Drone Squadron, or whatever we call it. Over the next 10 years or so, it's quite likely that Europe is going to be confronting Russia, unsure in the end just quite whether America is going to be there or not. We can't be absolutely clear about that. In those circumstances, what other big defence expenditures do you think that Europe in general and Britain in particular needs to invest in?
Well, first of all, let me just point out that there are U.S. forces deployed in the next likely targets of Russia, the Baltic states. We have elements in each one of those countries, and I'm quite confident that we will maintain that posture. We may thin out a little bit what we have in Eastern Europe at this point if the Russia threat is diminished a bit by its continued engagement in Ukraine and what happens after the guns fall silent. But I just think that the reality is if you have forces on the soil of NATO countries that could be the next targets, you're going to be involved. And I think, in fact, it's a very wise deployment because it does put Russia on notice that all NATO countries are going to be engaged, including those in North America. So I would just start with that. Is there, again, a bit of a caution in the tone that has come from the current U.S. administration? Absolutely. But it's been that cautionary note that has actually finally gotten Europe serious about defense.
And
to see what Germany is going to do, which could increase defense spending by some 700 billion to €1 trillion just in that country alone, that was not programmed, that is staggering. And to see the developments in other countries also supported by the EU with various loan mechanisms and so forth is dramatic. I was in Rome yesterday. Italy is getting to 2% of GDP for the first time in a very long time. And that's the case throughout just about all the NATO countries now.
And we here in Britain are now committed to 2.5%.
Yes, which is great to see as well.
Is that enough?
No, look, I mean, you're asking a soldier, do you ever have enough? And you should expect me to say no, no, no. Even when I was commanding the surge in Iraq, which was the main effort for the entire United States, and every possible unit that was available was deployed. We found them all and asked for them, and President Bush supported us without any hesitation. But even there, we never had enough of really anything, but especially some of the really important pacing items, which at that time were these surveillance drones, because, of course, there was a much more permissive air defense environment than you have in Ukraine and with the Russian forces, electronic warfare, air defense, and so on. So it's not, but the question is it much better than it would be? Absolutely. And it's great to see UK lead with this, given its prominence in Europe and in NATO.
There's talk again, obviously, at the moment about an American-Iranian nuclear deal being not very far away. What's your thinking about that?
I think there's a real opportunity here. If you look around the region and at home in Iran, I don't think it has been at this low a moment in many decades. Its major proxy, of course, Lebanese Hezbollah, has been dramatically degraded by the campaign overseen by Israel. The economy is doing very poorly. They desperately need to get the sanctions lifted. So I think there's a real opportunity here to get an agreement, ideally one that has the good elements of the previous agreement, but doesn't have those which rendered it one that was not adequate, which involved the sunset clauses, as you'll recall, starting at 10 years from the date that it went into force. The restrictions were progressively lifted over time, and also they didn't allow inspectors to visit every single area that was desired. So again, I think there is a real opportunity here. I think Iran needs this deal more than it has for many, many years as a result of the developments of the last year and a half or so. And I hope that we can get that. The alternative, as President Trump made very clear, is to execute the plan to destroy the Iran nuclear program, which was developed, in fact, when it's publicly known, when I was the commander of U.S. Central Command, the whole greater Middle East, and actually rehearsed one time inside the United States when we thought there was a possibility we might have to execute it. That's a very robust operation, and it would do enormous damage, not just to the nuclear program, which it will decimate, but also to the means of retaliation, the air and ballistic missile defenses, mine laying ships. There's a whole menu of targets way beyond strictly nuclear program sites that would have to be taken out.
Well, there is a serious and ominous warning to end on.